Today we're going to learn 6 techniques that are super important if you want to learn how to do realistic watercolor painting. Beginners will really benefit from this, but even intermediate, maybe a few advanced, will learn something on these lessons today. The first one is the most important in my mind, and then the last one is also the most important. And we're going to start with water control. We're going to start out with just showing you the basic water control. This is drippy, drippy wet. And then once off of there is a little bit less wet. And then I use a cellulose sponge. So once off there, and then touch it to that lightly. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, hold it down. And then driest of dry is if you need it really dry, like for animal hair or something. Then you want to use a tissue, have it damp, but get it dry enough that you can, let's see, can you see that? That you can spread out the bristles to make a fan. I keep my sponge handy all the time. I touch the water, my brush to the sponge every time I put it in water before I put it in paint. The second thing that I want to teach you today is how to use wet on wet to get your blend, and I'm going to get it wet. I have on my palette yellow ochre, sap green, and gamboge. And I'm going to start with this and be dropping it in up here. Now I need to touch my brush to the sponge to get control of the amount of water in the paint and get rid of some of the water. And I'm going right out to that edge, and then it's a little brighter at that edge, so I'm going to go with some of this gamboge along the edge. This is that little bright color at the end. And we're just going to let it blend itself in there a little bit on these. And then we need to get some darker color. So for the darker color, so I've mixed a rather drab color with some brown and some gold, and it's going to come along this edge here. And it looks terrible. It looks like a terrible color, but we want it to get darker, so we can keep dropping in paint until we get the leaf looking how we want. But like I said, I'm not going to put as much detail in as I will for the apple. So I'm just going to drop some paint in. And then we get back into the ochre over at this edge. Okay, now I haven't gone all the way to that edge because there's a fold over there. And I'm going to just let that blend. And it'll keep spreading a little bit. Number 3 is gradation. I have on my palette alizarin crimson, quinacridone magenta, pyrrole red, quinacridone rose, and ultramarine blue. Now if you're doing a big painting, you'll need much bigger puddles than this. I'm just doing a little 5x7 here. And I'm going to start on this edge over here and mix a little bit of the pink with the red and get this color. And go across. As I go across, I'm adding alizarin mixed with magenta to get into this more purpler color over here. Now these colors don't have to be exact. This is a photo, so this isn't exactly what it looked like. Now I've added some blue into the mix to get some of the darker color of this apple. And that leads me to number 4, which I need to do right now, and that is softening edges. So I'm rinsing my brush a little bit, not 100%, drying it pretty well, and going around the edges before it dries and softening it. And if you don't have enough water, get a little more on. And this will stop you from having sharp lines. Now, it would have been better if I had done that a little earlier. And then I can move on to the next colors without having gotten lines all over the place. So, and you can sharpen out, you can soften out to the next level. And throughout the painting, you'll hear me talking about softening. Softening involves dipping your brush, drying it off, or just drying it off, and not applying more paint necessarily. Okay, let's continue with gradation here. So some of this color, this darker color is down here, but not as dark. And we're going to just try to match our colors. Now we're going into two colors there, but because the paper's damp, they might blend enough without doing much else to it. And then it gets quite of a rosy, lighter color here. So I cleaned my brush pretty well, touched it to the sponge to dry it off. That's water control. And then I'm coming back in with this lighter color to get this glow that's down here. And there's this glow here. I'm going to keep these two little glowy spots. So that, you know, got a lot lighter than it needs to be. And this is all a bit pinker here, and we'll try to get some of that. And it's darker at the bottom here. And that helps give the apple its curve. Now let's get this darker, this blue mix coming across before that dries. I have a very dry climate, and that makes a little bit of complication with your paper drying faster than you want it to. So now this comes up in streaks a little bit. So I'll do that, and then I'll quickly go in with another color and put it in together so that it blends together, so that that's a gradation in color. And over here we have a pinker. So if you're brand new painting, you don't have to do all these different colors that I'm doing. You can just pick a color and do different shades of the same color. And if you're a little more experienced, then try this, because nature definitely has these nuances in it. Makes it so much more fascinating. But for the sake of learning, be easy on yourself if you're new. When I softened it, I got it a little bit too pink. So then what do you do? Well, then you get your brush rinsed pretty well, clear water, and you go back and you lift it. Well, that's kind of lifted already. Let me show you a new spot so that you can really get the feeling. Let's lift this one a bit more. You use a tissue and a brush that's got some spring to it, and it lifts things off. Now some colors are more staining, and it'll be harder to lift things, but it'll still work. And that leads me to number 6, values. When you get your darks dark and your lights light, and put them like they are in your reference photo, or like you see them in nature if you're painting from nature, then things will look round. Part of getting values right is having things darken up. I use these little tools to help me figure out if my values are right. Look how far off. Way far off. And this is way too light. So when I adjust all of those, it'll get better. Now, one thing that helps with gradation is using a soft quill brush. This is dioxazine and permanent alizarin. And I've got a nice, rich, dark color here. And I'm going to put it in, and I'm going to move a little faster now and not do as much explaining so that I can get it right. Rinsing my brush a bit, touching it to the sponge, and moving on across and moving on down. And then it spreads out into that. And then I'm going to move up. And as I move up, I'm watering it down a little bit. And that just looks so dark, it looks like it has to be too dark. And then we're going to come down here with some of this rose. And I have this quite dark, so I need to water down my puddle to get a lighter, more watermelon-y color. And now I'm going to tap my brush, get some of that water off, and blend it in again by softening edges, always softening edges. This pinker look back that, I went too red. Not that it matters, because, once this apple's done, nobody's going to look at the reference photo, so if you don't get your colors perfect, if you get your values right, it really won't matter. And I'm gonna stop on the apple now, and I might do some tweaking. It's not quite dark enough down here, but I think we're closer in color. That's still, the photo reference is still darker. It's a lot closer there, and a lot closer there. So it's getting there. And then I see that these edges need to be softened again. And I did lose some of the white glow on there. And so if you need to, you can go back in and do more lifting. But I'm gonna pick, for lifting, I pick an older brush and go in with it. If you really are desperate, you can get in with a very stiff brush and do it. Now, part of getting your values right is not letting your paint get too diluted. So one of the things that happens is people want to switch to a different color, like here, you know, this burgundy comes down lower, and then you rinse your brush really well, and it's dripping, it's that #1 stage, and you put it straight into your pile of paint, and all of a sudden you have very, very watered down paint. So whenever you rinse your brush, go to the sponge first and get water out of it, and then you'll have a lot more water control and you'll have better luck getting your values right. I'm gonna start with the wet on wet again in the background, and I'm just getting it wet. These quill brushes hold a ton of water, and I soften edges as I go up so that I can stay wet and not try to do the whole background at once. So I'm just doing underneath the apple. And I haven't really, I want some of the purple and red in this shadow that was reflecting off of the countertop it was sitting on. And obviously that's not nearly dark enough. But I want some of the red from the apple too. And we'll just leave a little bit of red in there. And underneath of here, it's considerably darker than it is for the rest of the shadow. And that's what helps to ground the apple. And then we'll need some darker on the apple as well for the same reason. So that's floating away on me. So I'm gonna rinse my brush and squeeze it out on the sponge so that it's dry and do some of that lifting that we talked about. And we're just gonna put in whatever colors we feel like it. I mean, if you want it to be a sky, you can put in a sky. You could even do some clouds. I have a video about how to do clouds really easily using a wet on wet technique with tissue paper. Tissues, not tissue paper. I always want some of the gamboge in my background. I like bold, bright colors. And I got a little bit carried away with the bold up here, so I'm gonna just take some off. I'll have to redo that stem. I'm just blending everything together. I don't want it to all become one color. So I'm gonna rinse my brush. I'm going to show you just a little more lifting. I think I got this too dark here, and I have a good stiff brush. I'm just going to make that a bit lighter and then make some of the streaks coming down from it, so that it's not just a white straight line up there that I have changed. All right, let's take the tape off. I hope you learned a lot about these different techniques: water control, wet on wet, gradation, softening edges, lifting, and most important of all, getting the values right so that your things look 3D. Thanks a bunch for watching. Happy painting.